Hey YouTube, just wanted to share some information here on my frame off restoration that I'm doing on my 93 C1500. Right now I'm getting the front suspension completely torn out so that I can get the frame ready for paint. As you can see, the frame has already been sandblasted. There is obviously a couple of areas that they were not able to get to with the front suspension on it. So you can see underneath the upper control arm, I'm gonna have to sand by hand. But right now I'm just removing the suspension. There's the lower control arm. Passenger side, I have not removed yet. Everything's loose, ready to go. But here it is. Some tips and tricks. Obviously right now it's a lot easier to remove the front suspension because I don't have anything on the frame. There's no motor, no nothing. But I do want to give you guys a tip. This spring is under a lot of pressure. So make sure that when you are removing your lower control arm, that you have a jack supporting the lower control arm before you break the spindle loose, and make sure you keep the lower control arm bolt on so that the control arm doesn't fall out. And another thing that I highly recommend you do is to chain your spring to your lower control arm. That way, if the lower control arm does perhaps come loose, the spring won't come flying at you. It's under a lot of pressure. So what I'm doing and what works for me is obviously I chain it to be safe, but once I break the spindle loose, I take the bolts out, and then what I do is I take the spindle out of the upper control arm first, and then lift it up and out of the lower control arm. As you can see, I have the lower control arm supported with a jack, therefore it doesn't go down once I get the spindle out. And then once those are out, what you'll have to do is you'll actually have to come up and unbolt your upper shock bolt, because the shock runs through the lower control arm. So if you don't undo the upper shock bolt, your control arm actually won't come down. So you have to take off the upper shock bolt, and then what I do is I slowly release the jack, and you'll see that lower control arm begin to drop. Once the control arm is dropped fully and there's no more pressure on it, that's when I come and take out the lower control arm bolts. You have one right there and one right there. Once you get those out, just put a pry bar in between the lower control arm and the frame and just pry it out, and that's it. You know, it's pretty simple. Just make sure, you know, always safety first. Have your safety glasses on. Make sure that you chain your spring to your lower control arm so that they don't separate from each other. As you can see, I have it double chained, and then I run the excess chain to the driver's side frame rail. That way I know for a fact that that spring's not going to come flying at me. So yeah, just a little progress work on the frame off restoration. I had him sandblast my radiator support. I had him sandblast my drive line. I had him sandblast my battery tray, my hood latch support. You know, all of this stuff was pretty surface rusted, so I just had it all sandblasted. Here you can see I have all my new suspension, brand new lower control arms, upper control arms, tie rods, pitman arm, idler arm. Everything is going to be changed. I'm also going to be changing the U-joints on my drive line while I'm at it. They're probably okay, but they were just about 20 bucks a piece. Actually, they were probably less than that. So we're gonna go ahead and change them. And then once we get all the frame painted, then we can start our reassembly, get the front suspension put together. Once that's all done, get the fuel lines and the put back in the frame rails, get all that stuff situated, and then obviously the next step is going to be the motor. Drop the motor back in. So this is actually a 5.7 350 throttle body injection motor behind or in front of a NV 3500 5-speed manual transmission. Now the motor has been rebuilt. It has about 5,000 miles on it, if that. The previous owner did rebuild it and provided me with paperwork on that. It's just very dirty, but it has been rebuilt. It actually has a new block if you guys can see there. It has a new block from Jasper, and it looks like a new oil pan as well. But the transmission is original, and the truck does have about 273,000 miles on it. So I'm gonna actually be having the transmission rebuilt by a local transmission shop here. And meanwhile, while they do that, I'm gonna go ahead and strip the motor and actually paint the motor, and then put everything back together. And along the way, you know, replace a couple things. This heater hose is on its way out, so we're actually going to replace this hose, but I'm not going to go with the quick disconnect fitting. I'm actually going to do away with the quick disconnect and use a barb fitting, and then just run some 5/8 hose through that. So the barb fitting that I'm going to be using is this right here. It's a 5/8 heater hose fitting. I bought this on Amazon, but you can get them at the auto parts store too. This is going to screw in right to my intake, and then I'm just going to use regular 5/8 heater hose to run from that fitting to my heater core, and that'll do away with this stupid design that GM came up with right here. And I'm really hoping this quick disconnect doesn't break when I remove it, which it shouldn't, because the motor has been rebuilt 5,000 miles ago. So you know, I'm pretty sure they had this fitting out, or maybe they didn't, who knows. Maybe they just took it off, took the intake manifold off and left the fitting in there. Very possible, I don't know. But if it breaks, we'll get it out. We'll figure it out, it's not a problem. And then also going to be replacing a lot of stuff on the motor, sensors in particular, that are hard to get to with the motor in. For example, the oil pressure sending unit. I'm going to go ahead and replace that. It was about $60, and I bought it directly from GM, so I know that that'll be good. And then I'm probably going to replace the knock sensor, which I believe is right there. That one's not too bad to get to even with the motor in the truck, but right now it's obviously a lot easier, so we're going to go ahead and replace that. And I'm going to replace my spark plugs and my wires and my cap and rotor, even though they were all replaced when the motor was rebuilt. You know, that was back in 2018, I think the motor was rebuilt. And so I'm just going to go ahead and replace them, just because it's a lot easier to do them right now, obviously. Get those out of the way, and then that's pretty much it. I mean, everything else on the motor is pretty solid. It has a new alternator. I'm also going to be doing the AC compressor, but that's something I can do with the motor in it. But yeah, just a little progress on the 93. This is a lot of work. This is actually my first time doing a frame off restoration, and I can tell you that it's not for everyone. It's a lot of work, and if you're gonna be scared of removing stuff and not thinking that you're not gonna be able to put it back, or not remember where it goes, then this probably isn't something that you want to tackle. There is a lot of little bolts and pieces that you will have to remove or disconnect or anything like that to particularly to get the cab off. You know, the cab is, I decided to do things kind of backwards. I left the wire harness connected to the cab instead of just disconnecting the wire harness from the cab and leaving it with the motor. And I did that for two reasons. One, in order to get the wire harness off the cab, this little junction box that runs through your firewall actually runs through the firewall and then goes up and connects to the computer. Now, in order to be able to get to the wiring to the computer to disconnect it so that I can pull this out of the firewall, I would most likely have to drop the dash. I'm sure you can do it without dropping the dash, but I was okay with doing it this way. And then the second reason I decided to do it this way was because I did have plans to disassemble the motor and paint it. So I would have to disconnect all this wiring from the motor in order to do that. So I just decided, you know what, I'll leave the wires connected to the cab, pull the harness with the cab, and then do things backwards for reassembly. So probably for reassembly, what I'll do is I will probably disconnect the wire harness from the cab, connect it to the motor, transmission, everything, and then drop the cab back on the frame. And then once I do that, I'll just have couple of junction boxes to connect back to the firewall. And obviously, you know, there's some bolts that hold the wire loom to the cab, so those will have to be put back. And then you have your junction box up here and some ground wires, fuel pump relay that will have to be connected. But it's a lot less wires to connect to the firewall than it is to connect to the motor. So I'm definitely going to be working backwards. And as you can see, if you're going to be doing something like this where you're doing a frame off restoration, you're going to want to label every single wire. That way, you know, you don't forget where it goes. Just make sure you have everything labeled. You know, as you can see, I've labeled almost everything that needs to be labeled. So I'll know that, okay, right here, you know, ignition coil. So I know I got my 2 plugs that go to the coil, and then I believe this one, can't remember where this one goes, but we'll figure it out. I mean, they're in the bag. I know this one goes to the oil pressure switch. This one, I'm not exactly 100% sure where it connects, but it's going to be something right around that vicinity. And then this is actually not sure what this is. I didn't even see this one, but I mean, it should be pretty self-explanatory. They should kind of line themselves up with where they need to go. Obviously, this harness, if I'm not mistaken, should go into there. But anyways, I've learned a lot along the way. Like I said, this is my first frame off restoration, but I've been around these trucks for a long time, so I know a lot about them and all that stuff. So it was a little bit easier for me. It wasn't something completely new, but obviously it is my first time doing a frame off restoration, so I am learning a lot of things along the way about these trucks and how lines are routed and wiring is done. So it does give you a very expanded knowledge of your truck in general. So right now I've pretty much building the truck back from the frame up, which is what the factory did. So along the way, I'm gonna go ahead and learn a lot of stuff, like how wires are routed and where they're clipped and all that stuff. So here's the bed on a stand with all marked up with where the dings and dents are. My buddy's actually going to be doing my body work and paint for me once I get you know, the frame done and get the cab back on the frame. He's going to go ahead and start the body work for me. Anyways, don't want to take up too much of your guys' time. If you guys have any questions or any concerns, or if you're doing a frame off restoration and you have a question, or you forgot where something connects or where something bolts, feel free to leave a comment and I can try to help you as best as I can. Only recommendation I can have is if you're going to tackle something like this, make sure you take a lot of pictures. And honestly, I think videos are better. I've been taking a lot of videos of where things go and where bolts go. So that's going to help me tremendously when I go to put things back together. So I would highly recommend not only doing photos, but also doing videos and telling yourself in the videos, don't forget to connect this back, or don't forget this bolt here. And you know, it's all the bunch of little stuff, you know. So right here you have this bolt actually holds down the brake line bracket from the spindle. So this spindle sits on a frame, bolts in, and then this hole right here is where this little retainer bolts in that holds the brake line. So it's a lot of little stuff that you'll definitely want to not forget. I mean, once you get to the reassembly, it's going to be pretty much like putting a puzzle back together, where things should fall into place, and most of the stuff it'll come back to you like, oh yeah, I remember this goes here. But nonetheless, pictures, videos, whatever you can do to remind yourself where things go, and then make sure that you organize your bolts too. I have one of those plastic bolt organizer things that you can buy at Harbor Freight or wherever, and I put all my bolts in there and I label them. That way I know when it goes back to assembly, I know exactly where all the bolts go. Anyways, you guys have a nice day. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to leave a comment if you have any questions, or if you've done a frame off restoration yourself and you have any recommendations for me on anything, as far as reassembly, or what parts you decided to change, what parts you didn't change. I'm not getting too much into changing a lot of parts. Obviously, I'm changing everything in the front suspension and steering. That's going to be all new. I'm obviously doing new shocks, things like that, but I'm not going full blown. Like I'm going to keep my original spindles and brakes and all that stuff. It's all good, so I'm not going to change it right now. I'll change it when it needs it, but obviously I'm going to go be pressure washing and possibly even painting the spindle before I put it back in. There's my sway bar that I'm also going to have to pressure wash and clean and paint before I put in. There's the center link. So everything is going to be cleaned and painted before it goes back together. But as far as a lot of new parts go, I'm not doing really too much to the frame itself. Obviously on the motor, there's going to be some work done on the motor and then all new AC system. I'm going to be redoing the interior of the truck, so all new carpet, headliner. I got to change my dash, it's all cracked, so it's going to be a lot of work. And I started this early June, maybe first week of June was when the truck first came into the shop, and I've been going at it since then. So it's been a little bit over a month, and here we are, you know, down to the frame, getting the frame ready for paint. So I'll let you guys go. Thank you.